The morning Lily Bennett saved a man's life, she was only trying to reach the red fishing bobber her grandfather had left behind. The old lake at Harrow's Edge sat at the far end of their property, a quiet stretch of water surrounded by willows and cattails that bent gently in the late summer breeze. Lily was 8 years old, small for her age, with copper-colored braids and bare feet that knew every root and stone along the muddy bank. Her mother was still asleep inside the cottage, exhausted from the double shift at the diner 2 towns over. Her grandfather's fishing pole leaned against the back porch where he had left it before he passed away the previous winter. Lily had carried it down to the water that morning not because she knew how to fish properly, but because holding it made her feel less alone. She had just settled onto the flat rock near the dock when she noticed something wrong. A man floated face down near the center of the lake. He was not swimming. He was not waving. He was simply there, still as driftwood, in dark trousers and a white dress shirt that had spread around him like pale wings. Lily did not hesitate. She dropped the pole, waded in up to her waist, then pushed forward into the deeper water even though her swimming lessons had stopped when the community pool closed 2 summers ago. The cold shocked the breath from her chest. She grabbed a fistful of the man's collar and pulled. He was far heavier than she expected, but the shallow ridge of the bank caught her feet and she dragged him inch by inch until his shoulders cleared the waterline. She rolled him onto his side the way she had seen on a television program once, pressing her small palms against his back until he coughed, then gasped, then breathed again with a sound like paper tearing. She did not know his name. She did not know that his car sat abandoned on the gravel road above the tree line, that his phone had died somewhere between the city and the lake, or that Ethan Carter had arrived at Harrow's Edge at 2 in the morning carrying a grief so heavy he had stopped thinking clearly about nearly everything. All Lily knew was that the man was breathing, that his eyes were open, and that he was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on a grown adult before. It was not gratitude exactly. It was closer to confusion. The confusion of a person who had not expected to still be alive. Ethan Carter had not spoken more than a few words in 3 days before he swallowed half a lake and found himself staring up at the face of a little girl with muddy braids and serious gray eyes. She had wrapped his own suit jacket around her shoulders because she was shaking, though she did not seem to notice the shaking herself. She was looking at him the way a child looks at something that requires an immediate practical decision. "Can you sit up?" she asked. He could. Barely. She helped anyway, placing both hands against his back with surprising steadiness. He sat on the muddy bank coughing water out of his lungs while she went back to retrieve the fishing pole she had dropped. She returned with it over her shoulder and settled onto the flat rock a few feet away as though this were an ordinary morning. "Did you fall in?" she asked without accusation. Ethan pressed his palms into the cold mud. He had grown up in boardrooms and corner offices where every word was calculated. The directness of the question left him without an answer that felt honest. "Something like that," he said finally. She nodded, accepting the answer without pushing further. "My grandfather fell in once," she said. "He was trying to unhook a catfish and lost his balance. He was fine though. He said cold water wakes a person up better than any coffee." She paused. "Is that true for you?" Ethan looked at the lake surface, now calm again, reflecting the pale morning sky. He thought about the weight he had carried down to that water. He thought about the cold and the sudden impossible pull of a child's hands. "I think it might be," he said. She reached into the pocket of her denim shorts and produced a slightly damp granola bar. She broke it in half and offered him the larger piece without ceremony. He accepted it. They sat together on the bank while the willows moved and the birds argued over the cattails and the granola bar tasted, inexplicably, like the best thing Ethan Carter had eaten in months. He asked her name. She told him. She asked his name and he told her, without the title or the company name or the net worth that usually followed it. She repeated it once to herself the way children do when they want to remember something, and then she picked up her grandfather's pole and began watching the water again as though the morning had simply continued from where it left off. Ethan Carter left Harrow's Edge that afternoon with dry clothes borrowed from a hook behind the cottage door and a phone charged from Lily's mother's kitchen outlet. Margaret Bennett had not asked him many questions. She was a woman who had learned to take things as they came, and a half-drowned stranger being fed granola bars by her daughter on a Tuesday morning apparently fell within the range of things that simply happen sometimes. She gave him coffee in a chipped mug and refused the money he tried to leave on the table when he thought she wasn't looking. He returned it to his wallet without comment. He drove back to Boston that evening in silence. His assistant had sent 11 messages and his board had scheduled an emergency call for Monday. The company needed him. The company always needed him. Ethan sat in the parking structure beneath his building for a long time before going inside. He thought about the flat rock and the granola bar and the way Lily had watched the water with complete patience, as though the lake owed her nothing and she expected nothing back from it anyway. He had not thought about patience in years. He had not thought about most things in years. He called his physician that night for the first time in 8 months and made an appointment for Thursday. He did not explain why. In the weeks that followed, Ethan threw himself back into work with the mechanical efficiency that had made him successful, but something had shifted in the background of his days. He found himself taking the longer route home through the park. He ate lunch away from his desk twice a week. He sent a donation to the community pool 2 towns over from Harrow's Edge without attaching his name to it. He told himself these were small things. He told himself they did not mean anything particular. He was not yet ready to admit that an 8-year-old girl in muddy braids had pulled something back to the surface along with him that morning at the lake. 6 weeks after leaving Harrow's Edge, Ethan Carter's assistant placed a manila envelope on his desk without comment. Inside were the results of an inquiry he had quietly commissioned through a private research firm. He had not told the firm why he needed the information. He simply provided what he knew. A lake called Harrow's Edge. A family named Bennett. A woman named Margaret who worked double shifts at a diner. A little girl named Lily with copper braids and a grandfather's fishing pole. The report was 12 pages. Ethan read it twice. Margaret Bennett was 34 years old, raising Lily alone since her father left when Lily was 3. The cottage at Harrow's Edge belonged to Margaret's father, who had passed the previous December and left the property without clear title, meaning the family faced potential legal costs they could not absorb. Margaret worked 6 days a week and still finished most months with less than $200 remaining after expenses. Lily attended the local elementary school where her reading scores placed her in the top 2% of her grade. Her science teacher had submitted her name for a regional scholarship program the previous spring. The application had been declined due to an administrative error in the submission process. Ethan set the report down on his desk and looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Boston skyline. He was a man who solved complex problems for a living. He was a man who moved capital across markets and restructured organizations and made decisions that affected thousands of people simultaneously. He picked up the phone and called his legal team first. Then he called his financial advisor. Then he sat quietly for a moment before calling a number he had saved in his phone under a name that was simply 2 words. Harrow's Edge. Margaret Bennett answered on the 4th ring, sounding slightly out of breath the way she always did between the lunch rush and the afternoon prep. Ethan introduced himself using only his first name, which was accurate if incomplete. He told her he was the man from the lake. There was a pause on her end that lasted long enough for him to wonder if she would hang up. She did not. Lily mentioned you a few times, she said carefully. She said you seemed sad. Ethan was quiet for a moment. She was right, he said. I was. Another pause. He explained that he had looked into their situation with the property title and that he believed the matter could be resolved without the family needing to spend anything on legal fees. He explained this simply and without flourish, the way he explained practical problems to practical people. Margaret was silent long enough that he checked the line twice. Why would you do that? She asked finally. Because your daughter helped me, he said. And because it's the right thing to do. He heard her breathe. He heard something that might have been the sound of a coffee mug being set down carefully. We don't take charity, she said. Her voice was not unkind. It was simply the voice of someone who had survived by maintaining very clear lines. It isn't charity, Ethan said. It's a debt. There's a difference. She did not answer immediately. He waited. He had learned to wait. I'll think about it, she said finally. He thanked her and ended the call and sat back in his chair. He had closed negotiations worth 9 figures with less uncertainty in his chest than he felt after those 4 minutes on the phone with a diner waitress from Harrow's Edge. Margaret Bennett thought about it for 11 days before calling back. Ethan knew this because he had counted. She called on a Thursday evening when he was eating takeout at his desk and going over quarterly projections that had stopped feeling particularly important. She said she had spoken with a local attorney who confirmed that the property title situation was exactly as Ethan had described and that the resolution he proposed was legitimate. She said Lily had asked about him twice more and that she had run out of good answers. She said she did not like owing things to people she did not know. Ethan told her she did not owe him anything. She said that was the part she was still thinking about. He asked if he could visit on a Saturday, just to confirm a few details with her in person. She said she would think about that too. She called back the following morning and said yes. Ethan drove to Harrow's Edge on a Saturday in late October when the willows had gone yellow and the lake reflected a sky the color of pewter. Margaret met him at the door with the same practical directness her daughter had inherited. She did not offer coffee immediately, which told him she was still deciding something. Lily appeared from the hallway behind her mother and stopped when she saw him. Then she smiled with the uncomplicated recognition of a child who has no reason to be suspicious of anyone she has already decided is acceptable. You got dry, she observed. I did, Ethan said. Thank you for that. Lily nodded as though this were a reasonable exchange of information and disappeared back down the hallway. Margaret watched her go before turning back to Ethan with an expression that was softer than the one she had opened the door with. She's been drawing pictures of the lake, she said. She drew you in 2 of them. Ethan looked toward the hallway where Lily had gone. I'd like to help, he said quietly. Not as charity. As someone who owes a debt he isn't sure how to repay properly. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped back from the door. I'll make coffee, she said. The property title was resolved by December. Ethan's legal team handled the administrative correction efficiently and without drama, which was how Ethan preferred things when he could manage it. The scholarship application error was corrected through a separate channel, and Lily's name was resubmitted with additional supporting documentation that her science teacher described as the strongest application she had seen in her 12 years of teaching. On the Saturday before Christmas, Ethan drove back to Harrow's Edge carrying a second-hand telescope he had spent 3 weeks finding after Lily mentioned in passing that she wanted to study astronomy. He had not told anyone he was looking for it. He had simply looked. Margaret opened the door before he knocked, which meant she had been watching the road. She accepted the telescope on Lily's behalf with a look that said she was still deciding how she felt about all of this but had provisionally decided it was acceptable. Lily unwrapped it with the focused intensity she brought to everything and immediately wanted to set it up on the back porch despite the fact that it was 4 in the afternoon and the stars would not appear for hours. They set it up anyway. Ethan showed her how to adjust the focus ring and explained the basics of finding a reference star for orientation. She listened with the same patient seriousness she had shown at the lake, asking 2 questions that were more precise than most adults would have thought to ask. They ate dinner at the small kitchen table, the 3 of them, with the radio playing in the background and the lake visible through the window as the last light left the sky. Ethan did not think about his office or his board or his quarterly projections. He thought about the flat rock and the granola bar and the way this family had continued through every difficulty with a quietness that asked nothing from the world while somehow giving it everything. After dinner, Lily fell asleep on the sofa with a star chart across her lap. Margaret washed the dishes and Ethan dried them, which was not something he had done in longer than he could remember. She talks about the lake differently now, Margaret said without turning from the sink. She used to just call it the lake. Now she calls it the place where things change. Ethan set a dry plate carefully on the shelf. He looked at Lily asleep on the sofa with the star chart rising and falling with her breathing. Smart kid, he said quietly. Margaret smiled toward the window. She got it from somewhere. Spring arrived at Harrow's Edge with the sound of red-winged blackbirds and the smell of thawed earth and the particular quality of light that comes when the willows first go green again. Lily had spent the winter observing the night sky with a discipline that impressed her science teacher enough to mention it at a parent conference that left Margaret both proud and quietly overwhelmed. The Regional Scholarship Committee had requested a personal interview, which Lily attended in her best dress with her star chart tucked under her arm as reference material. She answered every question directly and without performance. The committee chair later told the selection panel it was the clearest thinking she had seen from a child that age. Ethan drove to Harrow's Edge the Saturday the scholarship letter arrived. He did not know about the letter. He had simply kept coming on Saturdays because the drive had become the part of his week that felt most like itself. Lily met him on the back porch where the telescope stood pointed toward the afternoon sky. She held the envelope against her chest with both arms the way she had once held her grandfather's fishing pole. She handed it to him without saying anything. He read it. He read it again. He handed it back. Congratulations, he said. She nodded with the contained satisfaction of someone who had known something was possible and had simply waited for the world to confirm it. Then she looked at him with the gray eyes that had looked at him from the muddy bank almost a year ago. Did you know, she said, that astronomers say the light from some stars left before Earth existed? We're seeing the past when we look at them. Ethan looked at the lake glinting in the April afternoon. I didn't know that, he said. It means something that already happened can still reach you, she said. Even if it took a long time to get there. He was quiet for a moment. A red-winged blackbird called from the cattails. Like a debt, he said. She considered this seriously. More like a gift, she said. He thought about a granola bar broken in half on a muddy bank. He thought about a chipped coffee mug and a kitchen outlet and 11 days of waiting for a phone call. He thought about dry plates on a shelf and a star chart rising and falling with a sleeping child's breathing. Yes, he said. Like a gift. The summer Lily Bennett turned 9, the old community pool 2 towns over from Harrow's Edge reopened. The renovations had been funded through an anonymous donation the previous autumn, which the local paper described as unexpected and the town council described as a blessing, and which no one connected to Ethan Carter because he had specifically arranged it that way. Lily learned to swim properly that summer, which she approached with the same methodical patience she brought to star charts and fishing poles and conversations with adults who underestimated her. By August she could cross the length of the pool twice without stopping. She told Ethan this on a Saturday afternoon sitting on the flat rock by the lake, and he said that was excellent progress, and she said she knew. Margaret had accepted a position managing the morning shift at a better restaurant in the next town, which meant fewer hours for more pay and the ability to be home most evenings. She had stopped looking at Ethan with the careful measuring expression she had used in the early months and had begun looking at him the way she looked at things she had decided were trustworthy. This was not a small thing. Ethan had not been looked at that way in a long time. He had restructured his schedule so that Saturdays remained clear. His board had noticed and said nothing, which meant they understood without being told. On the last Saturday of August, Ethan arrived at Harrow's Edge to find Lily waiting on the porch with a drawing she had made. It showed the lake with the willows and the flat rock and 3 figures. One was a small girl with braids. One was a tall man with his hands in his pockets. One was a woman with her arms folded, which was how Margaret stood when she was content rather than guarded. Above the drawing Lily had written a title in careful letters. She held it up for him to read. He read it. He looked at the lake and then at the cottage and then at Margaret, who had appeared in the doorway with coffee in 2 chipped mugs. He looked back at the drawing. The title read, "The Place Where Things Change." And below it, in smaller letters that she had added as an afterthought, "The way children add things that matter most when they think no one is paying close attention, and where they stay changed." Ethan took the drawing with both hands, the way you hold something you intend to keep. He did not say anything for a moment. The lake was perfectly still. The willows moved. Somewhere in the cattails a red-winged blackbird called once and then was quiet. "Thank you," he said finally. Lily nodded. "You're welcome," she said. "That's what people say when someone needed something and you happen to have it." He folded the drawing carefully and put it in his jacket pocket where it would stay until he found a frame worthy of it. Some debts, he had learned, were never really debts at all. They were simply the beginning of something neither person had known they were waiting for, delivered by a small girl with muddy braids on a Tuesday morning when the lake was cold and the world had quietly decided to offer one more chance to everyone standing at its edge.